Greetings and welcome to the very first episode to this brand new video and audio show in the wake of our previous content over the last 2 years on the Pandemic podcast. So if you're watching or listening to this the first time, a huge welcome from me and the team at the Elevate podcast. This marks a change in direction for our content, having covered the pandemic for the past couple of years in granular detail, every particular nuance of the political response, as well as the scientific and data analysis that's followed that. And now we enter into a new phase where we are witnessing a global conflict. We're witnessing conflict amongst people on a polarized scale amongst a number of key issues facing the world. And amongst this backdrop of moving from a pandemic to a global conflict and facing many other challenges, the world facing none of the challenges, this podcast is designed to give you the opportunity to make sense of a world that seemingly does not make sense. The information landscape that we are witnessing right now in the mainstream media is more complex than ever before. There's a huge loss of trust in mainstream media entities as well as other central organizations. And now people are looking for different resources in order to navigate the complexities of the world. Yet the alternative media landscape is also riddled with challenges. So this podcast really seeks to play its part, a role in helping people to make sense of the world and find meaning, but more importantly, to look for solutions to the world's challenges. And indeed, we seek with this podcast really to bring some of the most inspiring thought leaders and subject matter experts who are really looking in depth at the challenges that the world is facing and trying to make sense of how we can actually build solutions to the world's problems. So in the first instance, this podcast will offer a role as a sense-making platform, really trying to hold the space where we can examine issues, critical issues facing humanity and the world we live in with an open mind, questioning the dominant narratives, trying to piece together the facts in order to try and discern what is real. And in doing so, really the goal is to identify what the crux of the issues are that the world is facing in order that we begin to really start to develop compelling solutions to those problems. There is a lot of issues that we could talk about in the world right now. There's a lot of issues that we could go into depth on, and it's important that we do that in order to understand it. But if we fail to actually transition from understanding the problem and actually moving into the solution space, if we neglect to move into the solution space, then we'll remain ever stuck in that challenging paradigm. So the podcast, the Elevate podcasts, the clue is somewhat in the title. We want to bring an uplifting and inspiring take on the world's challenges, to do it with through a lens of sense making, but also to do it through a lens of leaving the audience, those who are watching or listening to this podcast, feeling a sense of hope and optimism, because it's easy to feel depressed or overwhelmed or frustrated with what's happening in the world if all we focus on is the news stories. So sense making will be a vital part, but solution making, meaning making will also follow. So for us, launching this show has been a major step. It's been a huge leap of faith. We've reached in the last 18 months over 15 million views of our content focusing on the pandemic. And if you're new to the podcast and new to the brand, then and you're looking for insight in terms of what the Pandemic podcast represented, you can still find all of our content on all the major platforms. We recorded our final episode on Friday preceding this particular episode to kick off the podcast, wrapping up 18 months worth of work, over 400, maybe 500 episodes of in-depth content. But now we want to ramp up the quality. We want to ramp up the sense making and really start to look to the future in how we can build a better world for ourselves and for generations to come. Now, in order to do that, I believe there's two streams of thought that we need to navigate. Firstly is our own ability to transform ourselves as individuals and find a new sense of connection to our inner values, our human values, to find a new sense of inner meaning and purpose. It was said by a number of my previous podcast guests that it is the lack of meaning and purpose, and it's our relationship with anxiety that keeps us from advancing in challenging some of the world issues that we're facing. And it's really time that we start to address that by bringing you transformational content that can help you to understand, firstly, to know thyself, if you will, at the depths of understanding your core values, your core meaning, your core purpose, because it's our belief that the more people on this planet who become politically awakened or activated, personally activated, will become active participants in change, will become empowered in order to actually not only influence the quality of their own lives, but the lives of people around you. And that creates a ripple effect in our communities, in our societies, and more broadly across humanity. And we have to recognize that the ability to create change is within our control. It's often believed that global events, global issues are beyond our influence. But the reality is, as we've seen over the last 2 years, when many people come together, they can actually influence change at a grand level. So it's really important that we recognize our ability to create change, both individually and when we combine forces in order to tackle real issues. So firstly, the podcast will center upon yes, sense making, and then secondly, personal transformation, bringing you all kinds of insights in terms of how we can continue to awaken and empower ourselves, empowering ourselves in order to communicate with others more effectively and break down some of the polarization and the divides that have occurred from whether it be COVID, now Ukraine and Russia, previously to that Brexit or whatever, Trump, whatever issues have caused great divide, really to try and restore a sense of what Aubrey Marcus calls united polarity, in the sense that we are, in fact, one of the things that makes life so beautiful and so rich is the fact that we have this rich tapestry of different ideals and perspectives and ideas. And it's when we can find the ability to have reverence for one another, a reverence for humanity despite our differences, that's when I do believe we can find ourselves moving towards a greater sense of peace. And I do believe that fact that peace begins on the inside and is then manifested on the outside in our relationships with others. So it's a goal for us really to help us to transcend our current reality by creating transformative experiences for the individual. And then, of course, looking at the issues and the challenges in the world that we're facing, it really does take some new thinking around how we start to innovate, create, transform our systems and structures that currently operate the planet, the governing systems of the economy, politics, and all the various other systems and structures, education, healthcare, and onwards. It's really time for some grand new thinking about how we create and manage and operate these different systems and structures. And it's often said that, we cannot create solutions from the same level of thinking or consciousness that created the problems in the first place. So it really speaks to our desire and need to bring you content to help elevate consciousness in order to help society to continue to evolve, because we have it may not feel like it at times, but humanity certainly has been on an upward evolutionary trend. We may oscillate along the way. We may go in peaks and troughs, and we may be in a bit of a valley right now. But it's often when we hit those valleys that we bounce back and we really transcend the current challenges. And I think that's the opportunity that we have right now as we come out of one global event into another. It's a calling, it's a challenge to us to elevate our consciousness even further and actually continue to evolve. Now, the great challenge there is that in many ways, in the same ways that we see in the political and the economic space, is that if you take a zoom out, if you zoom out on the economy and you take a macro look at the macro economy, you'll see that the world tends to work in cycles. We go through these growth phases, then we go into decline, then we see a change in the economic world order. That's something that's essentially happening right now. America's dominance is seriously being challenged. China's on its ascendancy. These economic patterns, when we zoom out far enough, we can see happen just on repeat over and over and over again. And what tends to happen is in the growth phase is that people forget that good things usually come to an end. And the things that got the growth phase into motion often cause more problems than good and end up causing the decline. Now, there is this notion amongst humanity that we're on a constantly uplifting, increasing, elevating journey of our own human evolution. But there is part of the problem with that belief is that really, if you look what happens within economies and politics, as I've just mentioned, in those cycles, it's the belief that things will never get will only ever continue to get better that actually causes part of the problem. And my question would be is what if we didn't continue to evolve? What would happen if we failed to evolve through our challenges right now? Is it possible that humanity will end up on a decline phase and even face its own self-termination? And this, I believe, is one of the existential threats that we must tackle, is our own mindset and our own consciousness facing the way that we look at problems right now. And I do believe we're at the precipice of a choice point, of a fork in the road, where we either will move towards self-determination in developing solutions to our current predicaments and actually being able to look at the world more holistically and start to see the connections amongst things, or we'll end up going down a route of self-termination where we fail to catch ourselves in time, and we really do enter into an existential threat, whether it be warfare, whether it be another pandemic, whether it be a climate issue, whatever the issue may be. It's possible that humanity either will become the source of the solution or the source of our own demise. And this is where I think we're at that fork in the road, where it requires us to continue to evolve, but to recognize that there is a risk that we will enter into decline if we fail to elevate our own consciousness. Because let's be real about the situation right now. We're witnessing a global conflict in Ukraine and Russia, which is a very real and devastating story that we're watching unfold. The ever growing potential threat of nuclear warfare, for instance, which historically has been reserved for national leaders who have the opportunity to press, it's a bit of a movie way of looking at it, but to press the red button to fire the nukes. Well, the reality is we live in a world of exponential technology now, where any one of us could learn how to create a cyber attack on any individual nation. We could bring down the grid. There is all manner of decentralized ways, in fact, of creating widespread devastation that is no longer in the hands of the wealthy, no longer just in the hands of the individual nation states. Much of this technology has now been liberated and is in the hands of the people. And that technology can be a force for good. But there is also technologies out there that can cause great harm. And it's important that we catch ourselves, and as we continue down this road where some of those safeguards are no longer available, that we start to really think about how we mitigate against these exponential technologies. Because things like AI, robotics, again, there's lots of really positive practical applications, but there is also some really deeply concerning threats, not only to things, as we've seen over the last couple of years, when it comes to our own sovereignty, our own privacy, our own autonomy and liberties, but actually more broadly than that. There is much more propositional or mechanistic harms that could come from these types of technologies if we, as humanity, don't come together to understand how we manage these new developments. So we're in a really interesting place. And what I wish to do with this podcast is really to try and take a look at the breadth of the issues that the world is facing, to bring in people who are spending every day of their life kind of trying to understand the situation that the planet and the individuals and the society is facing in order to truly make sense of the world, but also really to start to unravel what the core issues are and how we can look at the interdependencies amongst these challenges to start to really think differently about how we can create what I call civilization design. Is how we start to look at humanity 5.0. If we're in the fourth industrial revolution that's supposed to bring all these great gains in technology, we're already seeing some of the costs that I've referenced just a moment ago. Where is that actually evolving to, and where does humanity fit into that? It's looking at the role of the human on an individual and collective level, which is why I coined the term humanity 5.0, which is about where is humanity going, where is humankind going, and that's something I really want to explore here on the Elevate podcast. Is what does the civilization of the future look like, and how do we ensure that the humanity is able to survive our own economic and technological development, and as is the planet. So you'll notice the Elevate conversation is far broader than what we've looked at on the pandemic podcast. Absolutely, it's necessary to do that, but really through the lens of sense making, personal transformation, and then societal transformation, looking at systems design, civilization design, how we can create change within our political systems, our economic systems, our legal frameworks, our healthcare systems. You're looking at how we can innovate, iterate, and course correct, reform where necessary, regulate where necessary, looking at transformation in a very different way. But ultimately, what I'm most excited about is really creating the conditions for each one of us to be active participants in change. And whilst the podcast is a way for us to collectively sense make and to start to examine some of these key issues that I've started to talk about, what's more important is this then translates into real world change. So the podcast in itself will be a content platform, which will be available on video and audio formats now. You'll be able to pick up the podcast on all of the major audio platforms, whether it's Spotify, Apple, all of the major audio platforms. You'll find the content on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, within our Elevate Network platform as well. And we'll continue to expand our platforms to extend our reach. But the idea is that we transform these conversations into change making. And what we're really passionate about creating is a counterculture movement that can really elevate humanity. It can enrich the world. It can create a free and open society where we advocate for conscious leadership that balances the economic and technological advancement with a resolve to enrich our planet and reconnect to nature, to focus on the well-being of all the inhabitants of the world, human beings and every other inhabitant that happens to share this planet, to cultivate a renaissance of compassion, awareness, love, the shared reverence for all of humankind, and really start to examine and explore a new philosophy for modern life based upon creativity, our innate ability to use human ingenuity to overcome any problem that we face, to find greater harmony with nature, to explore healthy living and how we can live more natural lives, explore how personal and spiritual development can play a role in expanding our consciousness, and starting to examine humankind's relationship with nature and the ecology of the world. Now, to be more specific, there are a number of core issues that we are looking to resolve on the Elevate podcast, and within the Elevate brand more broadly, is looking at how we can secure and advance freedom and peace for humanity, looking at how we can elevate human consciousness and pursue a journey of self-actualization that enables all of us to become empowered, active participants in change, looking at how we can strengthen civil participation, whether that's through democratic aims or otherwise, in order to to create greater accountability and transparency within governance, looking at how we can regain the ability to influence the trajectory of our societies, of our nations, of the world, looking at how we can build regenerative systems, looking at how we can decentralize some of the systems of power and control, looking at how we can localize and form community initiatives, looking at how we can tackle some of the loss of trust in institutions, and then importantly, looking at how we nourish and protect our planet. Because the reality is, and I shared this earlier this week, is that many of the kind of bad actors that I've witnessed playing out during the pandemic are equally involved in the issues that are supposedly for the good of our planet. And I have deep distrust of those actors. And it's not often very far around the corner that you find the conflicts of interest when you start to examine more closely. And the profit driver is often very much at the core of the way situations and crises are being managed. So I think it's time that we start to ask bigger questions about the influences that play out, the conflicts of interest, and start to understand what are the drivers and what do the drivers need to be in order to actually really create progress. How do we really increase our standard of living, particularly now as we face this cost of living crisis? Many countries now dealing with this, inflation, deep and structural economic challenges. How do we transcend that? But how do we alter the incentive structures so that we create the betterment for humankind and the planet that we live on, so that one doesn't have to come at the expense of the other? So to recap, through our content, we're going to cover a number of key themes through personal empowerment, through human consciousness, through political decentralization, through regenerative systems, through activism and political awakening, really as a means of examining how we create profound change in the world around us and tackle some of the deeper issues that have become really visceral during the course of the pandemic. The overt centralization of power, the propaganda, the grand narratives that sweep the headlines that seem to escape critical discernment, and looking at how these different influences and roles play out in the world, and how we can actually regain our agency in actually transforming the world around us. And I truly believe that change begins at home. And what we're really trying to develop here is transformational leaders, so that people can not only tune into their own inner potential, but tune out from the kind of overarching narratives that seem to be repeated in order to keep us in fear, and actually to keep us from actually enacting in our power, and actually to encourage you to rise up and become the leader that you were born to be. Because it doesn't require any one of us to have a title. We don't need a manager badge or a title as a leader or a company founder. The ability to create change in our own lives and the lives around us is deeply ingrained within each one of us. It's just finding how to untap that potential that is deeply within us. And this is really about a liberation. It's a liberation front. It's a liberation of our own potential. It's a liberation of our own ability to use our creative expression to transform the world around us. And it's my belief that this year in 2022 will be one of the most transformative and profound years that we have faced in many decades. And it will mark the very beginning of a really transformative period. I came into the 2020s believing that this would be the greatest decade of change in my lifetime, and I firmly believe that to be true. And I'm very excited about the journey ahead, which is why we've launched this Elevate brand to help lead and bring our audience with us on that trajectory. So there's a lot I could talk about. This is very much just the beginning. Tonight is just our celebration, our excitement of bringing the Elevate podcast to bear. Just to let you know where you'll be able to find us. If you haven't already subscribed to our mailing list, this is the place to keep up to date with our content, our campaigns. We've got our opening interviews this week. Tomorrow on the Elevate podcast, we've got Helena Norberg Hodge. We're talking about local futures and how localization is one of the ways that we can create community-led solutions to many of the world's problems. It's a fascinating conversation where we look at some of the nuances of the centralized systems and why they're failing. We look at the loss of trust, and we look at how we can actually start to build empowered systems to make a real shift on a localized level. It's probably one of my favorite interviews that I've ever done, and that's broadcasting live tomorrow night at 8 p.m. And coming up later this week, we also have Vijay Prashad, who is our first guest, who's commentating on the conflict in Russia and amongst Russia and Ukraine. What we do with Vijay is we take a zoom out. We're zooming out and look at the macro influences. We look at the role of the US. We look at the role of NATO. We look at the role of China. We start to examine some of the wider influences that are playing out on the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, and we ask, is Ukraine a pawn in a much bigger game? And that's going to be another fascinating interview that's coming out on Thursday at 8 p.m. Then we go into the Easter break, but then next week we've got two more fascinating interviews lined up. We've got Frank Ferretti coming to join us to talk about the future of democracy in the fourth industrial revolution, and we've got Julie Panessa coming to join us to talk about medical ethics in the wake of COVID-19, particularly with reference to medical mandates and what the future looks like when it comes to the fourth industrial revolution. What will bioethics look like? And again, how does humanity alter its course based upon the kind of paternalistic relationships that we've seen, where one's own autonomy and ability to make choices has eroded over the last couple of years? So some really fascinating insights coming up. And what we're really looking to do is build a faculty of people around the world who are making sense of the core issues that our world is facing and starting to examine how we can work together to find solutions. But this isn't just about working with experts. You know, the experts can help us to understand what's happening. But what we want to create within the Elevate Network, which is our private community, is a space for you to start to join the conversation about how we can create change. It's a place for you to share in the sense making. It's a place for you to share your ideas, and it's a place where we endeavor to become a catalyst for change. So you'll want to join our mailing list at danastingregory.com/podcast. It's the place where you'll be one of the first to hear about our new content, our change-making initiatives. And I also invite you to join the Elevate Network, which is our private online community. It's very early days. We've got nearly 4,000 members now, but it's a place where we're already looking at how we can build resilient communities. It's a place where we're already doing some sense-making work, and of course, all the existing campaigns that we've pursued through the pandemic, and now including the public inquiry. You will find the details inside of that inside of the community. So you can join us in our private community at weareelevate.org. It's very much in its infancy. We've worked very hard to get ready for the launch of the Elevate podcast, which has meant that the network is been developing in tandem, but we're looking forward to ramping up the efforts on both fronts in the wake of this transition to the Elevate brand. So there's two ways that you can primarily keep in touch. One is through the mailing list, which I've shared through danastingregory.com/podcast. And you can, of course, join the Elevate Network at weareelevate.org. Now, in terms of the content, as I mentioned, this podcast is going to be available on all major audio platforms, including Spotify and Apple. If you listen to podcasts on Spotify and Apple, or whatever platform you're looking at, if you go and find the Elevate with Dan Astin-Gregory podcast, you'll see our logo, and you'll also have an opportunity to tune into a short clip from our interview with Helena Norberg-Hodge as a preview for what's coming up. So I encourage you to check out the podcast on your favorite platform and hit the follow button, a little plug. And then finally, in terms of the video podcast, we will be continuing to broadcast our live sessions on YouTube, Facebook Live, Odyssey, and now Rumble. Rumble will be live also this week. And again, we're monitoring the different platforms that are emerging. We'll want to distribute our content as far and wide as we possibly can. So however you prefer to consume your content, whether it's audio or video, there'll be a place for you to find it, and all of our content will be available inside the Elevate Network as well. So it's a really exciting time, and I invite you on the journey with us. This is our opportunity to build a movement to elevate humanity and enrich the world. Let this be the decade of change that we have the opportunity to co-create. and I invite you on the journey. So let us elevate humanity. Let us enrich the world. Welcome to the Elevate podcast. It's my pleasure to be here, as your host, as we enter into a new dawn, as we start to build a new world. Peace and love to you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you on our very next episode of the Elevate podcast.